Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. Again, I apologize for the delay. I don't even have internet right now as I'm recording. I'm just praying that this little hotspot's going to be sufficient to upload this footage to get it out to you guys. We were hit by a bomb cyclone. Yes, that's a thing. I live on Tiger Mountain in Issaquah, the neighborhood town of Seattle. Look it up. It's pretty crazy, but this native Floridian feels hurricane vibes just around my street. You drive 15 minutes down the road, it looks like nothing happened. But here, it's pretty crazy. Here's another thing I wanted to put on your radar as we work our way through Daniel. This will be particularly meaningful to you if you've already read the entire Bible, particularly if you've read 2 Thessalonians. So yesterday, we saw this thing called the abomination of desolation, which we might recall from our study of Matthew chapter 24, because Jesus referred to Daniel. And this parenthetical, let the reader understand. Here's another thing from elsewhere in Scripture that you may not have known was in Daniel first. Okay, Daniel was written before the Gospel of Matthew, before the life and ministry of Jesus in his first coming, and then long before the book of 2 Thessalonians was written. So here's 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in God's temple proclaiming that he himself is God. Okay? Yesterday we saw that this is likely the abomination of desolation. It was typified by Antiochus Epiphanes IV, but Jesus, long after the Maccabean revolt, long after the offices of Pharisee and Sadducee are set in place, Jesus drew upon Daniel, referred to Daniel as a prophecy for the Great Tribulation. So it couldn't have been exclusively about Antiochus Epiphanes IV and his abomination of desolation, where he desecrated the temple, sacrificed a pig on the altar. It had to also be apocalyptic in nature, about the second coming of Christ. Well, here is another biblical case for that. The 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, the man of lawlessness, sometimes referred to as the Antichrist. In the book of Revelation, where we're heading, he's the beast. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul makes some pretty astounding prophecies and statements like the power of lawlessness is already at work, that it's always been at work throughout generations. There's always been someone there, because the timing of all of these events is known only by the Father, not even by the Son. One of the very few biblical delineations made between Father and Son, that the Father knows the time and the hour. Not even the Son knows the time or the hour. And so you better believe the devil doesn't know the time or the hour. So whom is the devil going to inhabit so that prophecy will be fulfilled? This one doomed to destruction. Well, at any given point, it's speculation, because Jesus hasn't come back yet. You've got the power of lawlessness at work. And you're not to be deceived in any way, because that day's not going to come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He hasn't been revealed yet. There's been speculation about all sorts of people. In one of our earlier sermons, we talked about the 666 thing, the number of his name, and how like that fits various political leaders and rich people, even people near Seattle, and Barney the purple dinosaur. We'll talk more about this as we get into Revelation. I think that it's also a 600 plus 60 plus 6 thing, and so we're gonna delve into that when we get to it. But I'm not gonna make any kind of proclamations as to who the Antichrist is. He hasn't been revealed yet. If I tried to make a proclamation that so and so is the Antichrist, and I know it for a fact, then I'm deceiving you. Don't let me deceive you in any way. That day's not going to come until the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Okay. The text says that he opposes and he exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in God's temple proclaiming that he himself is God. I believe that this is the abomination of desolation. Here's Daniel 11:36. Okay, we haven't gotten here yet. I'm not going to fully exposit Daniel 11:36 yet. Pray that I do it justice when we arrive. But I wanted to put this on your radar now because this is where we're heading. Remember, structurally, this is from the second half of Daniel, and so it's not narrative. The prophecies given to Daniel in chapters 7 through 12, with chapter 10 being a bit of an exception because it's sort of this prelude to this prophecy, chapter 11, they're not chronological. I think chapters 7 and 8 happen between chapters 4 and 5. And then I think chapter 9 comes between chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 10 comes after Daniel's... Chapters 10 and 11 actually come after Daniel's retirement. And chapter 11 is foretelling much of what God's going to do through like the Persian Empire. But we can see further prophecies. Look at Daniel 11:36. Then the king will do whatever he wants. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and he will say outrageous things against the God of gods. Okay, he runs his mouth a lot. Remember this. This motif is going to come up. You're going to see, for example, horns on creatures given to Daniel in visions, and these horns, bear with me, I know it's a anthropomorphism. These horns have mouths that are just running all the time and making all sorts of great boasts. Okay, so think like there's this creature, it's got a horn, the horn has a mouth, the mouth is making great boast and speaking blasphemies against God. Horns are symbols of authority. They're going to appear on various creatures. You're going to see all sorts of cool animals. But I wanted to put this on your radar. You've got this king that does what he wants, that it exalts and magnifies himself above every god, and he'll say outrageous things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, because what has been decreed will be accomplished. So this is coming up in Daniel 11. We'll talk more about this, but like what God has said he's going to do is going to be done. There are people who say outrageous things. Antiochus Epiphanes IV is one of those. But this is a motif that appears throughout Scripture, and it's this loud mouth against God, proclaiming self-deifying blasphemies against God, proclaiming oneself to be higher than one ought to be, and speaking blasphemies against the Most High. See, he magnifies himself above every god. He says outrageous things against the God of gods, and he will be successful. But that time has to come to a completion. I think yesterday's 1,290 days, or 1,260 days to be more specific. Again, more on that later. Because what has been decreed will be accomplished. So what I'm putting out there is that if you've read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, you've already seen something that comes from Daniel, that coincides with Daniel, or perhaps reinforces and elaborates upon Daniel. This proclamation of the man doomed to destruction, the lawless one, is revealed, and he exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, that he sits in God's temple proclaiming that he himself is God. See how this coincides with he will exalt and magnify himself above every God, and he will say outrageous things against the God of gods. I think that Daniel and Paul are talking about the same thing, and I think that thing is the self-deifying proclamation of the Antichrist, or the beast, in the temple in the last days. This is the abomination of desolation. I wanted to put that on your radar now as we endeavor our way through the book of Daniel, because the abomination of desolation is very important to Jesus. He talks about it in Matthew 24, and it comes with this emphasis, let the reader understand. And so I'm endeavoring to understand the abomination of desolation. I think that it was represented by Antiochus Epiphanes IV, but I don't think it's fulfilled. I think that it's just foreshadowed by Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and I think that Jesus used that prophecy from Daniel as exemplified by Antiochus Epiphanes IV to point forward to the real deal, the most tragic of abominations of desolation, in which the beast deceives numerous people with signs and wonders, sets himself up in the temple, proclaims himself to be God. That's coming one day. Daniel was used by Jesus. I think that it coincides with this teaching from 2 Thessalonians. So if you've already read 2 Thessalonians, guess what? You ought to be in familiar territory when we get to Daniel chapter 11. Keep all these things on your radar as we go through this fascinating prophetic book.